Welcome to episode 3 of 12-Week Relationships. This is better relationships in weeks, not years. My name is Pye.
Dr. Glenn.
Dr. Glenn, my co-host. Okay, today we are talking about, well, in the last episode, we went through your experience in trauma work and in psychotherapy and developing basically your system, this trauma-triggered therapy model.
Yeah.
This week, we're talking about what in the hell is a wedding photographer doing in the space of relationships and relationship coaching?
Yeah, absolutely. This is very exciting. We're kind of reversing it from the last one.
Yeah. So I guess I'll get started and talk a little bit about my backstory. Many of you will probably already know that I kind of, more than I fancy myself a photographer, I consider myself an educator and especially someone who likes to develop frameworks. And I do this because everything has been really difficult for me to learn in life. Nothing has come easy, whether it was high school academics, college, learning languages, relationships, how to sell something, how to start a business, creativity. So I started making frameworks around everything that I did to understand the why behind something and then give myself a simple model that I can actually internalize and say, I know, and I can actually make this part of myself.
What made you decide to do that with relationships though? Because it makes sense with like business, photography. I think you were an accountant before, you said.
Yeah.
School. But what made you decide to I have to create a framework regarding relationships?
I never understood relationships, dude. I mean, growing up, I was one of, 10 Middle Eastern people in Utah back in the 80s. I did not know a single other Iranian person in Utah. And it was very isolating. And growing up from junior high to elementary, junior high was when the Gulf War started. So I went from kind of being the person that was singled out to now being the person that basically everybody hated because nobody could distinguish Iran from Iraq. If you're Middle Eastern, you're this. And so I was the target of racism, the target of bullying, everything. And even amongst close friends, I didn't really know how to behave. I didn't even know how those friendships should operate, let alone romances and everything like that. So I went through high school and college. Girls didn't really want to date me. I got through, at college, that's when things kind of changed a bit. But I was engaged and married when I was in my first year of college. So at the point where I started to understand relationships a little bit better, I was already married and I was already in a not good relationship.
So that's really interesting because you're basically saying that the way that you grew up, nothing in your environment spoke to you about how does this relate to me? Nothing was relatable.
Yeah.
And then you had to try to figure things out because nothing externally would give you those answers.
Yeah. And even nothing in my home gave me those answers because my father was divorced and he had a series of relationships while I was growing up and those didn't work out. And I would get very attached to these mother-like figures that were, his girlfriends, his fiancées. And not to say that he had many of these, but it's just to say that each time he would date and I would get close to one of them, it would end and then that person would disappear. So I never got a good example of what a relationship should be, not in the home and not really outside of it because I couldn't figure it out for myself.
So what made you decide to get married? Because how old were you when you got married?
I was 21 or 22 at the time. I was very young.
What was was culturally, was that a reason? Or I knew you grew up in a Mormon church. Was that part of it too?
Yeah. So I am no longer practicing, but so you go on a mission when you're 19 years old. At least it's sort of expected of the guys. It's encouraged with the girls, but that's one of the things that you do. And whether they say you should be going or not, it's culturally expected when most of your peers that are 19 years old are going. Whether they say we don't necessarily say that you need to go or have to go. If all your friends are going, you kind of feel like you're being left out, right? So I went, and it was a wonderful experience. It was a truly wonderful 2 years. I grew so much in that time, and for my father, who's not a member, he even told me my life was kind of a mess at that point, and he said, "You either go in the military or you go on a mission, but you pick one of these." And I went on a mission, and it did make a lot of those corrections. It helped me to really try and figure out who I am, what I want to be doing with my life. It was a wonderful experience. But when you get home, your next assignment, your next responsibility, and I even had my mission president, a man who I love very much, he told me, okay, the next thing for you is let's find you a woman and you're going to get married. That's your next goal. So I treated it very much like any other goal.
Yeah.
Find someone who's acceptable and jump straight into this, head first into the deep end.
So literally, like, because that's like the age, like 18 to like 21 to like 30 is your age of like figuring out who you are as a person. But you literally, at the beginning of that period, were married.
Yes.
So you had to try to figure yourself out
While trying to.
Not sure about what's going on, like growing up, and try to make a marriage work.
Correct. And for that reason.
Yeah, no pressure, man.
I mean, I'm not alone in this, dude. There are so many people, like in Utah, it is very common, just within the kind of Mormon culture, it's very common to get married young. And we're talking, you get back from your mission, you start college, you get married sometime in those next few years. That's considered normal. And there's a lot of cultures that are like this. I mean, any highly religious, borderline religious to fanatical is going to have almost that similar setup where you're in your early 20s by the time you're married.
Yeah. But it's interesting, like the Mormon culture, like if you like do studies on them, they're some of the most successful people in the world. Like if you just do like basic studies in terms of like income and success in general, they're one of the highest in terms of culture, but they're also one of the highest in terms of depression and anxiety.
Yeah.
Because it's such a high pressure, like there's love in it, but there's so much pressure to perform and to succeed.
Well, and drug use in Utah is rampant in places where, it makes sense, to be honest, because the other crazy part about it is that we don't even have good statistics on drug abuse in Utah because, Mormons are not supposed to do drugs. So when they do them, they go about it the legit way, which is going to their doctor, claiming to have certain symptoms, getting prescriptions, and then abusing those prescriptions. So we don't really even know what those numbers would potentially be, but they're high. And in my opinion, it's high because, yes, as a culture, as a group of people, there's a lot of love there, a lot of amazing people, and the work ethics are incredible. So you do get a lot of really high performing, successful individuals. But the stress and pressure of trying to do all of that, like to figure yourself out while you're in the middle of a marriage, and you're encouraged to have children young as well. Yeah. And then you add that to the mix, it's pretty insane. Like it's crazy.
That's a lot of pressure at such a young age.
Yeah.
But like, I'm starting to understand you because nothing in your environment, people that you went to that you respected, they were not able to give you answers that you needed that spoke to you. So it basically became, I have to figure this out myself.
Correct. And so a week into my marriage, I knew things were, in fact, it was before we were even married, we had pretty significant doubts, but you're also, there's the religious aspect where we would say that we prayed about this and we got the right answer. And really the answer came probably in the form of like, I'm horny and I just want to get like it's difficult to distinguish the difference between just this. You can mistake what they would refer to as the spirit for anything. Sure. I felt the spirit watching every single Marvel movie. Like not to like, every Marvel Avengers, like the whole like opening scene, when Captain America caught the hammer and it was like I felt the spirit in that moment. I mean, I don't mean to be sacrilegious, but I mean to say that feeling that I identified it as the spirit was the same exact feeling that I would feel at a great movie moment. It was the same exact feeling I would feel when I was excited about starting a business or about anything. So when it came to praying about getting married, this feeling that I felt was the same. And I interpreted that and said, this is God telling me to do this. So when my ex and I had doubts before we were even married, I said, God has told us to do this. We should do this. And there's something to me now that is very terrifying about that thought, because you can't distinguish that thought among any other form of religious fanaticism, right? If God has told you to do something, there is no other conversation to be had. There is no other possibility for right and wrong.
So like that euphoria that you were feeling when you met your ex was like, in your mind was like God telling you like, this is it.
Yes.
Get married.
Yes. And we had specifically, after 2 weeks of dating, we had specifically prayed about it. And that was the feeling that I got. And so when she would have doubts, when I would have doubts, I would go back to that. And then a week in, I knew, okay, we need help. And so I was already seeing counseling.
Yeah.
She didn't feel comfortable going to counseling. It's a, you know, I to add to the complexity of everything, I married into interculturally, right? So she was Chinese, I'm Iranian American. The connection there is that I speak Cantonese and Mandarin.
That's impressive,
to a point
by the
of
way.
fluency.
Yeah.
So we communicated in Cantonese at home and whatnot. But there was a lot of cultural barriers too, because it's not okay if you are Chinese. It's not okay, and I'm gonna speak in generalities, but there are very specific cultural things of saving face, and seeing a counselor is the exact opposite of saving face.
It's stigmatizing.
It's very stigmatized, even more so than it would be here. So I was going to counseling alone. Started a week in and continued for 14 years.
14. And what was that experience like for you? Because it always seems like you're seeking out help from an external means. How did this experience go for you? I think most people know, but
yeah, I mean, the one word I would describe is anger. It made me frustrated to go from one person to the next, because the frustrating thing for me was how everybody would cling to their piece of advice as the right thing, and in reality, it was no different than the cliche advice that I was getting from friends. I mean, there might be a degree hanging on the wall, but ultimately it ended up being the exact same advice that I would hear from other people. And I got to a place where I just started asking each counselor, just tell me what a healthy relationship looks like.
And what would the response be?
I don't know. It would be, it's complicated. It would be, you know, a healthy relationship is all about compromise. A healthy relationship is about good communication. And I got to a point 10 years deep where I would start kind of openly displaying contempt towards the counselor. Like, okay, you're telling me that all I have to do is communicate well.
Yeah, it's that simple.
It's that simple.
Yeah, exactly.
Like if you and I can just have a good conversation, then we're meant to be married.
Exactly. Very superficial, very symptom focused. Everything gets reduced. Nothing else matters.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then they would say things like, it's all about compromise. Okay, so nobody gets what they want, and that's just, you know, everybody's unhappy, and this is what marriage is.
Yeah.
Like, what about the other aspects of it? What about the ability to relate to somebody? What about the ability to connect on a level that's deeper than you would expect from anyone else? What about the sex life? What about all these other components? You're saying that you can boil it down to just these things?
Yeah. Can I ask you, like, because you talk about frameworks, and we're gonna get into that more, but like, what did you see in terms of traditional counseling? What was the framework that you were being provided? Like, in a general way? I know that's hard to generalize, but
the framework that I was being provided in
general, from like the 14 years and all the counselors that you've seen.
But that's the frustrating thing. There was no framework.
So it was all different.
Everyone had something different.
Yeah.
And then I would pick up a book. So I started the process of reading relationships books at the same time, right? From one book to the next, it was the exact same thing. One person would say it's, you know, all about love languages. And Love Languages was a great book.
Sure, it helps.
You know, it was Gary Chapman's book was fantastic. But it still was one aspect of a relationship. It was, how do you show appreciation to somebody, or how do you understand? And even at that, I felt like there was a lot of missing pieces. And then I pick up another book. Another book would be garbage. It would be written, you know, by somebody who either has the experience or it somehow made a bestseller list, and yet it contained nothing to me that was valuable. And I pick another one, and it would be good, but again, a piece of it. So after 14 years, I just ended up confused. Like, I had no framework.
So where was the point where you were just like, you know what, you know, like, fuck this, man. Like, I'm just going to make my own.
That was 14 years into it. That was at the point where my second to last counselor, when I said to him, like, none of this stuff is working. Can you just help me to understand, like, how do I actually get this thing to work? How do I get this? And he said to me, I don't know how to I don't know how to fix your marriage. Give me some time. Let me think on it. But I don't have the solution. You've read every book on my shelf. I don't have the solution for you.
That's crazy.
And that was, again, I was frustrated that he's telling me this after I spent a few $1,000s on his services. You know, like, by this point in my life, I'd spent well over 6 figures on counseling, relationship coaching, books, everything.
Yeah.
And I'm angry.
Okay.
And so, yeah.
So it's not working. You're frustrated. You're pissed. This guy's telling you, I don't know how to help you. You're struggling in your marriage at home. And then how did you get started with this framework that you created?
So it was on that drive home when I kind of began to piece it all together. When I said to myself, okay, nobody really has what I'm looking for. Maybe these answers are helpful to some people, but what I need is for somebody. I'm 34 years old, 35 years old at the time, and I still can't tell you what a healthy relationship looks like. No, none of the professionals that I'd ask could tell me what a healthy relationship looks like. And I thought, what if I were to just work on answering that question? What if I made a framework for that question? And I said to myself, I think I have all the information and data that I need. I mean, I spent 14 years studying it informally, and then I looked at my job, and I'm sitting here going, I'm a photographer. I photograph families and weddings and relationships. That is what I do nonstop. And this camera, this thing that I'm happen to be holding in my hand, it's kind of this passport. It's this passport into somebody's life, in the sense that I'm not carrying a tote board. You're not sitting down in my office awaiting to be judged, right? By a counselor. And granted, counselors aren't supposed to be, but that is what often happens in counseling sessions, is you kind of lay out your story, trying to get the other person to say, you're the one that's right, they're wrong.
Yeah.
But I'm a photographer. So what I would see would just be people that were behaving normally. They would act normal, and they wouldn't be presenting a version of themselves that they would present to a counselor. They were presenting their authentic selves. I could watch them, how they would communicate with their parents, with their friends, with each other. I could watch subtle interactions. Like when we start walking down a path to go take photographs, does he have any regard for her stepping down a trail while wearing a dress? It's these subtle pieces of body language and communication to say, is he on her mind, and is she on his mind, through these little minor moments during the shoot? And when something comes up, what is their first response to that challenge, to that bit of conflict? So I realized that I had a data set. I had a laboratory that most professionals could only dream of, because I could just sit here and observe and watch. And so I did. I just started observing.
Well, I mean, the whole premise of therapy is that it's a microcosm of what takes place out in the real world. But for you, you're able to literally be in the real world.
Yeah. So I took essentially all the books and all the information that I had, and I had this rough idea of, these are all the pieces of what makes something healthy. And then I just observed, and I would tweak and modify. And after 500 plus case studies,
that's a lot.
I ended up with, okay, there are two sides to this relationship. One side is the desire, the want for that relationship. The other side is your ability to be able to sustain it. And these are the pieces within each of these two sides.
On a personal level, let's say that you watched a couple and they're struggling or they're having a hard time. Did that personalize it for you? Ooh, I can relate to this one.
Definitely. I think it's more so challenging when I'm documenting a couple who I know they're going to face some significant challenges, and they don't yet see it. But yeah, it does make the job more personal, and to the largest extent, I would say it made me far better at what I do, because I could actually diffuse situations without even them knowing it. I can actually diffuse something before it actually happens. So on the wedding day, on those moments that are stressful, I can step in and kind of sort of relieve tension and do things that make the day go better. Granted, I'm not there every day of their lives, but at least on this one significant day, I felt like it allowed me to do my job much better.
What about the couples where man, they look like they're going to make it? How did that make you feel when shooting it, doing the work that you were doing? What did that bring out of you?
It was excitement.
Okay.
I mean, I could see as the framework came to life, and it took several years for this thing to kind of start looking like it was actually holding up. But at that point, it got very exciting. I would see that, okay, these people have regard for each other. There's relatability present. They have shared core values. They understand what those core values are, even if the term isn't there. They have common interests. They align, and it pulls you into their relationship. You almost, it's kind of weird, because as the photographer, I almost fall in love a little bit with the two of them as a couple. So when I document and I create those images, you feel a sense of closeness to them, that it's almost unusual. Like I don't know that I could describe it any other way.
So when you say regard, like how would you describe, what does regard mean in a relationship?
So I always had a hard time with the idea of attraction. And maybe we can talk more about this in a separate episode, but the idea of attraction was so overly simplified to me. Attraction is, you know, we think of it as purely physical, right? There's gotta be chemistry. There's gotta be this, they gotta be hot. You're hot, Glenn.
Thanks, man.
But
the regard is high.
But I've met so many people who I would consider physically attractive, beautiful, who I found repulsive. And that was the first thing that made me question the idea of attraction, that there's more than just something physical there. There was something substantive, like something underneath that, that had to do more with respect, with admiration. And in fact, that respect and admiration could outweigh the idea of physical beauty. So that's where I came up with the idea of regard as how you look upon somebody. And the framework that I developed is for every relationship. It's not just, it's any long-term relationship. So whether it's a friendship, whether it's a marriage, whether it's, you know, romance, whatever you want to put it as, regard is still present, meaning there needs to be this sense of admiration for the other person. There needs to be, I need to have high regard for you to want a relationship with you.
Yeah, I love the definition you gave me. You said it's the combination of love and respect together.
Yeah. It's like this. Yeah, exactly. And so regard shows in very obvious ways in a relationship. It's those subtle things of like, when there is conflict, what is the first thing that I would say to you? How do I respond to you?
Right.
When we are, you know, walking down the street together? Are you on my mind?
Right.
Are you a consideration for the things that I do?
Right.
So it shows up in these very simple and evident ways where, I'll give you an example. One couple that I was photographing several years back, this is 6-7 years ago. And I never, in all my case studies and everything, I never divulge any personal information. I actually change every bit of information so that you can't even potentially identify it. It's a fictitious person based on, you know, real life events. But in this one case, I asked, you know, a question like, what do you guys do for fun? And he responded with a joke. She takes my credit cards and goes and spends her money with her friends, and laughed. And she kind of laughed a little bit awkwardly too, right?
Yeah.
We think of those things as jokes, and it's kind of a joke, but with a half truth underneath it. And that half truth is the fact that he doesn't like that. He doesn't like it, and that's why he's pointing it out as something like, it's almost like this awkward sort of.
There's humor, but there's like resentment underneath.
Exactly.
Yeah, and you could feel it.
And I could feel it in the way that he would talk about it. Whenever it came to like, what do you guys do for work? And his responses would be almost derogatory, but subtle. Subtle jokes, subtle jabs. Yeah. And I could tell that even though he was making jokes out of those things, he didn't have regard for her. Those were things that were cutting away the underlying regard that he had.
Yeah.
And within a year, they ended up being divorced because that tension is going to persist, whether you acknowledge it or not. You can make a joke out of it. You can do whatever you want, but it's there, and it has the same effect either way.
So you're doing this study at your place of work. You're trying to figure things out. You're seeing the 500 couples. Were you taking that model and trying to apply it at home too?
Yes.
And then how did that go?
Not good. I mean, I do think that I had a rather extreme example of a relationship.
Yeah.
I think that, you know, when you're in a place, and we talked earlier about how you're forced when you're young to try and figure out yourself and your career and your children and what you're going to do for society and everything, all at that time.
Yeah.
I think two things can happen. You either kind of succumb to the pressure of it and decide to do nothing, or you rise to it and you kind of figure it out as you go, right?
Yeah.
But if you succumb to it and you continue kind of not doing and not going and not pushing forward, you kind of end up lost yourself.
Yeah.
And when you're lost, you have a really hard time sticking to anything, to doing anything consistently. And over time, that pattern sort of replicates, and it becomes it's like scar tissue. You know, scar tissue, it's easy to fix when it's like when you're a year deep, but once you're 10 years deep into scar tissue and it's added up and built up, it becomes very difficult to break those habits, and you kind of get into this loop. And so I feel like my ex was caught in that loop, and there wasn't anything to repair there. But it took me understanding the framework to realize that, and to say, there is nothing that I can do. There is nothing that I can fix, and I have to give her the opportunity to do that on her own. And I need to make decisions for myself that are going to make me healthy enough to be a good father. Because at the time I was spending, I mean, for those 14 years, most of my energy was in my business or was going to trying to figure out my marriage. And when I had children, very little of that time was being spent on them. I had bigger problems. I had to fix the marriage. So that was the thought there, but it took time to figure that out.
So it was like this whole journey of self-discovery. I think one thing that's common with both of us is like growing up, and a lot of the experiences, the environments that we were in didn't provide the answers that we were looking for. So then it became like, you know, pain became our motivating factor, right?
Oh, for sure.
And it's like, let's figure this out because no one else can help me figure this out. So I'm going to figure this out on my own. And then eventually it's making the choices to get to a place where like you're living your truth. And I think that's what it means, right? Like your framework ultimately is about just living a truth for you that makes sense, and honoring that.
Absolutely. And I heard this incredible quote. I'm going to remember who said it, but for now I'm just going to butcher it and not say who said it. So maybe Anthony
just
can
take credit for it.
But I'm not going to take credit for it. But it was a quote that said, find your greatest pain and develop a solution for that. And now you're living from a place of authenticity. So my greatest pain throughout my life has been learning, to be honest. I was considered a special needs child when I was growing up. And so my father was counseled by many teachers saying, like, you need to hold him back. He needs to go into special ed. He's not, you know, and in reality it was that I wasn't good at learning the way that schools wanted to teach, which is rote memorization. Do this. This is the formula. This is, you know, how it goes. And now you got to memorize it and be able to replicate it on a test. And I couldn't learn that way. I had to learn the why behind all of it. So my biggest pain point has been learning. And so I became a frameworks person, a learning expert, so that I could create simple solutions for myself. And they just happen to be useful for other people.
So like with the whole CVFT model, it's fair to say that once you created this model and you had that in place and you're able to say to your ex-wife, like, this is just not working out, we need to move on. And that was a success. And then your marriage now is just living out what CVFT is to you. Yeah.
And technically I'm not yet married, actually. Yen and
I'm sorry.
I guess we're domestic partners.
Domestic partners. Excuse me. Sorry.
But yeah, we're living it out now. And but had I known all these things, this is the crazy part to me. I have spent thousands of hours of my life on this stuff. You know, we spend so much time in school learning formulas and algebra and going into geography and like learning social studies and history and all these things. It's not to say that they're not important, but it is to say that, like, in my life, I've never encountered an issue that dealt with my personal success or happiness, and it had to do with one of those subjects. The subjects that, like, where you've run into those issues are subjects like relationship, business, interpersonal communication, like, but we didn't spend time doing that in school.
No, it's true. I mean, one thing that I will say is, like, you keep mentioning about like not having the degree, but all the books that you read when you created the framework, and then even your book itself, it shows how well read and how much you've studied relationships. Well, like that comes through, like that just shoots through. And then even for myself, like when I started doing it and then looking at my own marriage, it hits hard. It really hits hard because there's like actually a map, and it's like, man, this regard piece. Okay, let's go there. Let's figure this. Let's figure this out. Conflict resolution. How do we do this? Like all the different components that you laid out, it's like in your face.
Well, I appreciate that, man. But that compliment means something only from you, because I'd heard that from I actually had the chance to work with, I think, about 20 couples in the process of writing the book, and people that would like friends, and they would say things that are similar, but you need somebody, you need a doctor with 20 years of experience to go and look at it and to say there's actually validity in this, because I get it. Like there's so much information out there. I don't have a degree. I don't have, you know, the first basic piece of credibility would be the degree, right? Not to say that if you have that, you're necessarily good, but that's the first basic piece. And so it means a lot to hear you say that, because you do have the credibility, the experience, everything.
But the training is so general, and it's more about like just practical knowledge, but the level of application, like you have way more training, to be honest, with everything that you've done. Like it's more than me. Like honestly, like that's what I loved about it. It provided a map, and it's very clear about what you do need to do.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, one of the things that I loved when we sat down, we actually started to realize what each of us had.
Yeah.
It was a very serendipitous kind of thing, because I don't know that I put a lot of stock in universe these days. I do believe that, you know, we're here for a higher purpose. I don't know what that is, other than just learn, be good, and be a good human, you know. But when I recognized what you had, it was literally the piece in my book that I said, this is something that I cannot address, which is past trauma. I can give you a roadmap to what a healthy relationship looks like. I can help you understand how to go forward, but I can't help you deal with the past.
Yeah. And then once again, like my practice and then coaching would be, if each person deals with their trauma, then you guys can figure out how to make the relationship successful. But that's not true. You still need a guide to get to that place.
Correct.
And that was a missing piece for me.
I think most Freudian kind of methods would say the same thing, right? You address the past and now you're good going forward. But it's kind of not necessarily true, because you can fix the engine to your car and still have no idea where in the hell you're going.
No, it's true. Absolutely. I mean, you can have that hallelujah moment and be like, have this cathartic experience, but it's like, okay, what now?
Yeah.
What do I do next?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sorry. And you provide that.
Well, thank you. That is what ended up being Stupid Simple Relationships, the book, which I know a lot of people ask, like I'm getting quite a few DMs like, when can we get the book? I'm actually waiting now, because since we started working together, I was like, you know, there's a lot of things that I want to tweak and adjust. And maybe that's the Lee, one of my closest friends, would say, this is the perfectionist in you. The thing that I say to other people, like, you just got to get it released and you got to get it done. I get it. But since we started working together, there's a lot of things that I want to actually adjust. And so,
yeah, I love the fluidity of it, the completeness of it. But it's so funny, because when we met, we would come from two different perspectives. You'd be like, what about this? More present oriented. I think it's more past oriented. And we would just go back and forth. And then eventually I was like, oh no, this is all encompassing. This is all one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's where we landed. So
yeah,
what was really cool about this is Stupid Simple Relationships, or what we call the SSRM, right? The Stupid Simple Relationship Method.
Yeah.
Why is it stupid simple? Because if it can't be simple and intuitive, I don't feel like it's worth learning. And that goes for any education or framework that I develop. If it's not simple and easy to understand, like, I don't think it's worth spending someone's time on. But the SSRM was basically a roadmap of like, look, these are the components of what a healthy relationship should be. And these are the pieces that are going to keep your desire, your want for a relationship alive. These are the pieces that are going to make the relationship possible from a emotional standpoint to maintain. Because if it's too costly, it's not sustainable.
Yeah.
And then when we took 3T, this was trauma triggered therapy. This is your process. And we blended them together.
Yeah.
This is where we developed core value focused therapy, which we now have a trademark on. And core value focused therapy is essentially the process of diving into a person's underlying core values. And we'll talk more about what those are going forward, but diving into those core values, understanding who they are from that level.
Yeah.
And in the process, you always uproot trauma.
Yeah. And you know what I love is we're able to separate what's a couple's issue that's happening today that you guys can work on, and what's your actual own traumas.
Yeah.
That's like interfering with what's taking place.
Yeah. And I get chills when you say that, because it's like, for the first time in counseling, and we don't even call it counseling, we call it coaching. Because for the first time in this process, you have individual areas of accountability, and then you have joint accountability.
Yeah.
And so as we go and understand each person's underlying core values, we also understand their trauma, and we work backwards and identify these are the areas that you individually need to fix. They're not his problem. They're not her problem. They're not the relationship's problem. They're your problem.
Yeah.
And then we look to say, these are the joint core values that we can look to build on.
Yeah.
And here's how this relationship is going to work going forward, and give them precise recommendations down to here are some interests that might be good for you. Here are some things that you could do that would actually be quality time based on your values. And these are the areas where you're lacking relatability. These are the pieces. So it's not just general guidance, it's dialed in.
Yeah. And then, you know, we don't BS, like that. We call bullshit. Like if you're not at that place or you're not taking accountability for your own issues, this thing's not going to move forward, and we'll call that out. We will call it out. Yeah.
For sure.
Yeah.
So that's it for this episode, really. On the last 2 episodes, in episode 2, I wanted to dive deeper into your backstory and kind of this process of trauma-triggered therapy. And in this one, we dove into my kind of background and how we landed at SSRM, the Stupid Simple Relationship Method, and how the two of them combined to create core value focused therapy.
Yeah.
So now, with all of you guys, our amazing audience, kind of up to date, I guess we get to go through topic by topic. We're going to start breaking down and just going through and discussing different typical relationship scenarios, and some scenarios that you might not even be thinking about. Like, for example, your understanding of relationships and your ability to be able to create these relationships matters in a sales situation, in an interview situation. It matters obviously for your marriage, for your family relationships,
projects, anything that you do.
Projects.
Yeah.
So how do you identify, you know, who's a potential friend? How do you know where to place your time when it comes to dating? So there are a lot of really fun and cool conversations that are going to be had. And we just wanted to say we appreciate each of you being here. There are so many different platforms, different places for you guys to spend your time, and it's an honor having you with us. So thank you. This is it for episode 3. If you guys would like to follow the podcast, we're at 12 Week Relationships on Instagram, as well as whatever social media channel. You can also find us on YouTube. We'd love for you to subscribe. We also have a website, 12weekrelationships.com.
That's coming out.
Yes, it's going to be out. Actually, at the time of releasing this episode, it should be up and available. You guys can actually sign up for a free 15-minute consultation with Dr. Glenn. And we're primarily focusing on couples, but you do a lot of work individually. You also do a lot of work with, business professionals and everything. So the website is really geared toward, helping couples, but it's for anything. So if you want to hop on and get a free consultation, then go ahead and do that. In the meantime, we'll see them all in the next episode.
Thank you so much.
Peace.
Thank you.